Hallo mensen, mijn naam is Johnny Verkuringen, CEO bij Europese Goudstandaard, een Belgische dealer van fysiek goud en zilver, baren en munten. Op ons YouTube-kanaal interviewen we de grootste specialisten ter wereld op gebied van economie, edelmetalen, financiële of monetaire markten en vandaag hebben we zelfs een eerste politieke gast. Dus abonneer je op ons kanaal en vink het belletje aan, zodat u voortaan een melding krijgt bij elke nieuwe video en geen interessante informatie mist. Nu, zoals ik al zei, vandaag hebben we een zeer interessante gast en niet zomaar een. We hebben namelijk Godfrey Bloom te gast. Godfrey Bloom was een Brits politicus en Europarlementslid van 2004 tot en met 2014. Daarvoor werkte hij 30 jaar in het financiële hart van Engeland, de City of London, als City Fund Manager. Hij is dus een van de weinige politici in de wereld die ervaring heeft vanuit deze twee invalshoeken. Binnen de politiek stond en staat hij bekend in de ogen van andere politici dan om zijn controversiële opvattingen en opmerkingen en zij vinden of noemen zijn tussenkomsten zelfs verwerpelijk. Uiteraard is dit, om wat hij zegt, niet altijd past in hun kraam. Persoonlijk vind ik hem een van de weinigen, zo niet een van de enige binnen de politiek, de welke ik ooit heb zien en horen praten met echte kennis van zaken over het financiële, monetaire en economische systeem. Ik laat u even een paar tussenkomsten zien tijdens zijn periode in het Europese parlement, zodat u al een beeld heeft voor wat Mr. Bloom staat.
I rise again, I'm afraid, to make the same old hoary speech that I've been making here for several years. And that is, it is my opinion that you do not really understand the concept of banking. The state is an institution of theft writ large. Tax is just about a system where politicians and bureaucrats steal money from their citizens to squander in the most disgraceful manner. This place is no exception. We have counterfeiting, sometimes called quantitative easing, but counterfeiting by any other name. The artificial printing of money, which if any ordinary person did, they'd go to prison for a very long time. And yet governments and central banks do it all the time. May I suggest that if you really want tax harmonisation, that the Commission and the bureaucracy pay the same taxes as the electorate. They bear the same burden as tax as the rest of us before the electorate storm this building and hang us from the rafters as they've every right to do.
Wij zijn in ieder geval heel blij en trots dat we met hem een interview kunnen doen en hem een aantal prangende vragen kunnen stellen. We gaan hem nu aan het woord laten. Welcome, Mr. Godfrey Bloom. We are very glad to have you. Before we start, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you all have done in the past and what you are doing now? Because I know a little bit of you, but I can imagine that not all our viewers know who you are.
Delighted, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you. And greetings to everybody in Holland. Let's see, where shall I start? Back in the 1960s, 1967, I started in the City of London at a big brokerage house. And I then developed my career in investment management, and I specialized in fixed interest, which wasn't very glamorous, I'm afraid. All the glamour was in equities, but I managed fixed interest, which of course then became a lot more important towards the end of my career, as fixed interest played a much bigger role in the management of portfolios. Mm-hmm. So that was my experience in the city. I then went into consultancy work, broadly doing the same kind of thing, investment management in some form. Then I went into politics. I'd never been in politics before, but I found myself then on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. Mm-hmm. Which was a fascinating experience, where I found there are 40 members on a committee, on any committee in the European Parliament, and I was fascinated particularly on the Monetary and Economic Affairs Committee, having spent over 30 years in investment management in the city, to find that my colleagues in the committee had absolutely no idea whatsoever how money worked, or banking worked, or investment worked. It was the most extraordinary phenomenon. There were socialist trade unionists, there were Danish housewives, there were all sorts of weird people who had no idea how money worked at all. And I had to spend some time explaining how things actually work before they could pass legislation. So we had the most extraordinary situation. They were legislating on things of which they knew nothing. But then I suppose that's politics, isn't it? It doesn't matter what they legislate on. If you drill down, they never seem to know anything about it. I'm sure it's true in Holland. I don't know whether it's true in Holland, but it's certainly true in Britain. You've never seen such a bunch of idiots running the country. You just simply couldn't imagine it. But then it seems to be the same every country. But there we are. I did cross-examine in my period in office the central bankers, the president of the European central banks. And on my website, those interviews, they're getting old now, but they're still saying the same message. That, of course, the central bankers, president of the central banks, don't understand how money and banking works either. So it's an interesting phenomenon. And of course, that's why we are in the mess that we are in. And I've written a little book called The Magic of Banking to try and explain to ordinary but intelligent people who have an interest on how the system works. And that's sold very well. And I'm just working on the 3rd edition, so all the graphs are up to date. And I've invited some very prestigious speakers and lecturers to add to it. And I've got a guest spot that they can add as well. And all the graphics are there. And everything I predicted with the 1st edition has come true, of course, as it was bound to do. But it's not complicated. It isn't complicated. Money and banking aren't complicated. They're not difficult to understand, but I'm never quite sure whether people willfully don't understand it or they're really stupid. It's probably just a bit of both.
Yeah, thank you. We operate from Belgium, not Holland, but I think it's the same everywhere. Now we have prepared a few important questions for you. Maybe we can start with the first one, if that's okay with you. Now, for years, also, I personally follow politics, mainly the financial and economic items, of course. And every day, I am again and more amazed of what politicians around the world sometimes spell out for nonsense. For example, I was asking myself for more than 10 years, the world politicians, do they really know nothing of the monetary and economic system, or do they pretend to know nothing? Until at one time I see somewhere on YouTube an intervention of you in the European Parliament, and then I thought, finally someone knows how the system really works. And at first I had hope, but then I saw the other look at you, as if you came from another planet. You have been running in this circuit for years, and I think a lot of our viewers would like to know, how is it really? Do they really know nothing, or do they pretending to know nothing?
Well, it was my experience, and I'm sorry, I didn't realize that there's Belgium. Well, greetings to everybody in Belgium then, in that case. You ask a very good question. Yeah. Very good question indeed. I was 10 years in politics, and I don't think I ever came to a final conclusion whether they didn't understand it or just pretended they didn't understand it. I think that the truth of the matter is that they don't understand it. And they are obsessed with what they call modern monetary theory, which of course is Keynesianism by any other name. Now, what we have is an interesting phenomenon with, let's call it modern monetary theory, shall we, for want of another expression. This is a system where, of course, you can print as much money as you want. You don't have to raise money through taxation. You can just simply print it. And I've said in the Parliament that if, of course, anybody, ordinary person doing this, would go to prison for counterfeit if they did that. That would be illegal, and you go to prison. But politicians, via their central banks, do it all the time. And it's a very attractive idea, modern monetary theory, because what it actually says is the politicians can print as much money as they like to give to their cronies, give to their friends, buy votes at election time, and there can be no problem with that. They can go on forever. Well, of course, it can't go on forever. You can't go on and on printing money digitally, and that's what it is. In the old days of the Weimar Republic, when there was monetary inflation on a horrific scale, they actually had to print the notes. They actually printed the notes. But of course, the printed notes are intrinsically worthless. Your dollar or your pound note or your euro is simply a piece of paper. It's intrinsically worthless. It only has value if you can persuade somebody to give you goods and services in exchange for it. So your cab driver or your barman or whoever you're doing business with will accept the note in exchange for goods and services while he has confidence in it. And back in the Weimar Republic, people lost confidence because there was so much of it printed. Now, we don't physically print it now. We create it electronically, digitally. So you go into your bank and you want a loan for £20,000 for a car. It's produced on the screen electronically. It doesn't exist. It didn't exist until you walked into the bank. Now, of course, there is this great pretense both in Europe and North America and Japan. There's this pretense, not so much in Japan, but generally speaking, that this pretense that the banks are independent, that central banks are somehow independent of governments. They're not. They're recruited. The president of the, or governor of the Bank of England is selected by politicians. And so consequently, you get this same system of money printing all the time. Now, that means that Great Britain, for example, is in debt. We are in debt to the tune of 3 trillion. The government is in debt to nearly 3 trillion pounds. Now, what does that mean, 3 trillion? It's beyond human imagination. We can't conceive 3 trillion. The Americans are in debt to the tune of something like 30 trillion, and it's growing. National debt globally, national debt, corporate debt and private debt is 270 trillion pounds, or dollars, sorry, $270 trillion. Beyond human imagination. We can't imagine it. I've been in financial services all my life. We stop at about $500 million or $1 billion, imagining ordinary human beings. It gets to about $1 billion and we run out of brain power. You know, there's so many noughts on it, we just give up and walk away. And that's what we've done now. We've given up. Governments have given up because the debt is so huge. It can't conceivably be paid back. It can't conceivably. In England, it works out, I think, roughly speaking, £250,000 for every individual in the wealth creating sector. You can't count anybody else because they don't create wealth. You can't count the civil service or the man at the town hall because he doesn't create anything. So it's totally impossible to ever repay. And of course, debt has to be serviced. The interest has to be serviced. They create bonds. Now, of course, there's zero interest rate on bonds. And in some bonds, if it's Swiss bonds or German bonds, the rate is moving to negative. Why anybody would want to buy government debt, which is guaranteed to lose you money over the next 10 years, I really don't know. But if there is this perception, there's this perception that sovereign debt is somehow AAA rated, so that somehow countries can't go bankrupt. Well, you've only got to look at history. Of course countries can go bankrupt. They're bankrupt now. The United States is bankrupt. Britain is bankrupt. The European Union, broadly speaking, is bankrupt. So it's on life support. And the European Central Bank, as you're there in Belgium, and it's particularly pertinent to you in there in Belgium, the governor of the European Central Bank is borrowing or buying junk debt to the tune of 60 to 70 billion euros every month. This, you know, this is simply unsustainable. They're buying a lot of Italian debt, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, really, you want your pension scheme invested in Italian debt? Is that really? I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's utterly crazy. And sooner or later, the whole system is going to collapse. It has to collapse because it can't sustain itself. And the debt is growing every month. And what politicians will do, they will pretend that it's COVID or coronavirus, that it wasn't their fault, it was force majeure, and you know, they didn't create it, it was an act of God. All that coronavirus has done is accelerated the process of bankruptcy. It's moved it quicker. And it's the government's reaction to coronavirus we must just bear in mind. Not coronavirus. It's the government's hysterical reaction to the virus. We're in martial law here now in Britain. We're hoping to come out in another 2 weeks. We've been locked in our houses basically for over a year. The police have been given extraordinary powers, unprecedented in Great Britain. And I suspect it could be because they see the complete collapse of fiat currency and banking, and they want the levers of power in place for when they can lock us easily back up in our homes to stop rioting when people realize that their life savings have been wiped out.
Okay. Yeah, it's a whole story. Thank you for that. Now, I also hear you talk in the European Parliament that the euro was doomed to fail in any way, and certainly because they didn't follow their own rules that they have prepared for it. Maybe first you can explain some things about these things about the euro, because these things do not come mainstream, of course.
The euro, or the common currency, of course, as we called it at the beginning, the common currency, is inherent. There's nothing inherently wrong with the euro in itself. It's just it's a medium of exchange. Money is just a medium of exchange. That's all it is. And the euro is just another medium of exchange, like the dollar or the pound or the yen. So there was nothing intrinsically wrong with it. But the set of rules that they put together had to be abided by. Otherwise, the euro was going to collapse. And that meant that governments couldn't overborrow, overspend, in order to keep the currency stable. This was the reason that they put in these rules and regulations. Now, of course, the rules and regulations were broken almost immediately. Funnily, ironically, by the Germans, who have a reputation since 1945 of being fiscally very careful and doing all the right things. But of course, that was the new Germany, the new Greater Germany, when East and West Germany came back together again. They had to cheat on those rules in order to make that work, because the Deutschmark, the East German mark, was given parity with the West German mark, which was ludicrous, because the East German mark was worthless. So they broke the rules, and then we see the Greece breaking the rules. Now, the reason that Greece, they blame the euro. I don't blame the euro. The problem with Greece is they brought it on themselves, because their governments will not stop spending more money than they bring in. And it's the same with most of the Mediterranean countries who are fiscally incompetent. Now, the northern, what used to be the Hanseatic League, going back in history, so you've got the Low Countries, Germany and the Low Countries, they've always been more fiscally responsible. But of course, they're propping up the Mediterranean economies, which are not. Now, your average voter in Europe doesn't understand how this works at all. So where we have the fascinating situation with this concept of shadow banking. Shadow banking is difficult to explain really, because it's quite an ephemeral thing. But shadow banking is off balance sheet, as it were. You can't see it's there, but it's not actually written down in front of you to look at the accounts properly. And for example, Deutsche Bank is owed something like, well, it's just owed billions and billions under the shadow banking system, which is why the stock price of Deutsche Bank has plummeted by 90%. The whole of the City of London, New York, Hong Kong, Zurich, everybody knows that Deutsche Bank is bust. You know, its shares are worthless because it's owed all this money by these shadow banks and the system. So how you actually fiddle your accounts. So we know that Societe Generale is broke. Santander is broke. All these banks are broke, but they can hide the fact that they're broke by putting their debts in a different column, and they can put that onto the shadow banking system. Now here's the funny thing: the German worker, or the Germans, think that, or the average German thinks this is all right because they're selling lots of Audis and Mercedes and chemicals. They're exporting, they're a great exporting country, Germany. They're very efficient manufacturers. What they don't know, what the German workers don't know, is that they haven't really been paid for those cars, those Audis and those Mercedes. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all in a different accounting system. It goes on a shadow banking system. They haven't really been paid. And they might just as well have dumped all those cars in the North Sea, because they're never going to be paid, because all these banks are actually broke. What actually happens, if I can make it simpler for people viewing, imagine going into a bar and getting a tab behind the bar and buying all your friends drinks, and you have a fantastic party and it's really going well, and the barman thinks it's great, the owner of the bar thinks it's fantastic, he's selling all this drink and all the rest of it, and it's all going on the tab, and they're bringing more money down from the brewers, more beer from the brewers, and it's going, and it's fantastic, and the party's really rocking, and it's going on for days, this fabulous party. But nobody can afford to pay the tab, so the party looks fantastic while it's lasting. But of course, sooner or later, the tab has to be paid, and there's no money. And that will bankrupt the man buying the drinks, it'll bankrupt, the barman will lose his job, the man will close his bar, and the brewers will never be paid, and they'll have to close as well. This is what is happening. The party's going on, but what's happening now is people are just starting to see the danger, just very slowly. They're beginning to see the dangers, and the smart people are seeing the dangers and what they're doing something about it. And the smart people are buying gold and Bitcoin. What they're wanting to do is get out of the paper currency system. They want to get out of it because they can see it's heading for the rocks. What happens, therefore, to inflation? Now, here's an interesting concept of inflation. What's actually happening is, of course, if you have monetary inflation, if you go on printing money, you will eventually inflate prices. Now, what we've seen so far is asset price inflation. So we've seen bonds inflated, the stock market's inflated, real estate is inflated. And all that's at an all-time high. And people think the party can go on forever. But it's all been based on borrowed money or printed money. It isn't real. So assets, people say, the governments across the world will tell you inflation is only 2%. And that's our target. Ludicrous. If you look at asset prices, houses in London in the last 20 or 30 years have gone up tenfold, because it's an asset. And this is happening, and it's now starting to happen. And the Americans will call, they're moving it from Wall Street to Main Street. And we're beginning to see inflation now in the high street. You're seeing it in your shops. Now, what the governments do, they have a basket, which they call of goods and services, which go into the price index. So you have price index, retail price index, and all this kind of thing. And that's selected by governments. So what hasn't gone up? What hasn't gone up? White goods, refrigerators haven't gone up, phones haven't gone up very much. And they're all the things that they keep in the basket. And it makes it look like it's only 2%. But if you look at other things which aren't in the basket, things aren't looking so good. And prices are going up. And if you look at shadow stats in America, where they've got a very efficient system of gauging inflation, what inflation really is for the average Joe Sixpack, they call them in America, and they reckon it's 11%. And it's 11%, roughly speaking, in this country, as people know, but they've not been told the truth by the government. They've been told that inflation's only 2%. But every housewife knows that's not true. I mean, for example, in the last year, Wi-Fi has gone up 30%. The pint of bitter locally at my pub has gone up 11%. Any man who comes to fix anything, he cut the plumber, whoever's coming to your house to fix it, his prices are up by at least 20% on where they were last year. And you can gauge that. That's quite simple. And so inflation isn't what governments tell you that it is. So they're lying. And of course, eventually it can only go up with all this money awash, fake money. Then you'll find that everything's going up, and we'll find we are where we were with the German, the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. Now the difference is you could run away from it in Weimar Republic because there were stable currencies like the dollar, the franc was backed by gold, and the pound sterling. So there were other currencies on the planet, which were stable. That's not true today. That isn't true today. You'll have, if you look at a basket of fiat currencies today, you've only got to go back 20 years to see that they have fallen by 80% against gold, which is real money. Gold's real money. Paper isn't real money. Gold's real money. As JP Morgan said in 1912, only gold is money. Only gold is money. And that's your benchmark. So we have this situation where paper currencies are collapsing against gold. Now, people make just a word on gold. People make a mistake. They think gold is an investment. It isn't. Gold is money. And so what does that mean? Well, when I'm lecturing at universities, I've been banned from most universities, incidentally, because they don't like what I'm saying. Too radical for them. But I always show a gold sovereign. A gold sovereign. It happens to be dated 1905. That's right. But I explained to the undergraduates, the young men and women, that would buy you, that sovereign in 1905 would buy you bed and breakfast in a good London hotel. It will buy you today bed and breakfast in a good London hotel. And in 100 years' time, it will buy you bed and breakfast in a good London hotel. And when they brought up the Mary Rose, the British ship, the English ship, which went down in the English Channel in the time of Henry VIII, so that's the 1500s. That's the 1500s. It had gold coins on board. They will buy you today what they would have bought you in the days of Henry VIII. Gold is real money. It holds its value. And so I've been adding gold to my portfolio for years, because I'm now at a stage as an old man, I want to preserve the wealth I've got. I don't want to make money. I want to keep what I've got. And the only way you can do that is with gold or precious metals. That is the only way you can really do it. I don't know of any other way. Sometimes people argue real estate. The trouble is with real estate is most real estate is acquired through borrowed money. So when currencies collapse and debts collapse and banks collapse, people will have to unwind their positions by getting rid of. So you will see a property slump. I've lived through two in England, 1974 and 1989. Most people in England think that your house can only ever go up in value. But they're not old like me. They're young and stupid, because we were all stupid when we were young. I was particularly stupid, but there we are. So we call getting on the ladder. We're calling it here, get on the ladder, the property ladder. But of course, there are snakes as well as ladders. So it will go down. And I think that's going to come a lot sooner than people think. So this is the problem when you meddle, when you let politicians meddle with the medium of exchange. You should never, ever let politicians get near a money printing machine. And if you think anybody watching this, if you think about anybody watching this, if you had a machine in your attic that would print money, would you use it? Well, of course you'd use it, wouldn't you? And if you were a really good person, if you were a really good, honest, nice person, a responsible person, you'd still use it, because you'd always find a very good reason. Your wife's ill, your daughter's getting married, all this kind of thing. You'd use it. Now, this is an interesting thing which modern monetary theorists can never answer the question to. If printing money is good, why don't they all give us a little machine at home so we can print our own? I mean, that would be the logical progression of thought, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But that would mean they're giving control of that money to somebody else, and they can't give that money to the people they want to give it to, because we'd spend it, we'd spend it on different things, and the government spends it on its cronies and to buy votes and all the rest of it. So we are heading for the biggest crash in banking in history. Now, the next question always people ask me, they say when. Well, if I knew exactly when, I'd be as rich as Bill Gates.
Yeah.
So it's all about when. In the investment business and in the money business, it's when's it going to happen. I thought it would have happened in my first edition of my book. I thought it was going to happen November of last year. I estimated November of it, and I made that estimate in 2014. So, you know, but it could happen. But when it does happen, it will happen very quickly. Everybody would be surprised how quickly. Remember how quickly the Berlin Wall came down, and the Soviet Union collapsed. 1 minute it was strong with submarines and armies and tanks, and we woke up one morning, it had gone. That's exactly what's going to happen to the banking and fiat currency system on the web. We'll wake up one morning and it'll be over.
That's so fast. I think the next question is a little bit with that. All the large banks or system banks are virtually bankrupt, we know that, through the design of the monetary system that we have today. The debt-based system and the fractional reserve banking system and the interests on it. So insiders and people who know something about it know that the current financial system is on its last legs. How do you see the politicians handling or resolving this? I can't believe they don't have a plan A or B.
That's a very good question. It's a very difficult question. And I tell you why. When I was in office, I met a lot of very senior people. I mean, I've met the Chancellor of the Exchequer today in Britain, and I've met very senior bankers. You would imagine that they have a plan B.
Yeah.
You would imagine, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I
that
think so.
They know everybody. And I thought this before I went into politics.
Yeah.
I thought that they knew something I didn't know. And when I became a politician, I would be led through a secret door, and they would explain and show me why they make totally and utterly irrational decisions on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But there isn't a secret door. They really are stupid. And of course, they will run away. the politicians that we have today, when it all collapses, will be gone. They'll be gone. The central bankers will be gone. So we'll have to pick up the pieces. New people will have to come forward and pick up the pieces. And here's the sad thing. I'm a libertarian. I believe in liberty. I believe in the strength of the individual being allowed to get on with his life without government interference. But when we see these collapses, as we've seen historically, we don't get libertarianism. We tend to get fascism or communism. That's what we end up with. Because people then, the French Revolution was no different. When government creates these terrible disasters, people always think that somehow the government didn't have enough power and we need to give governments more power to solve the problem that they made. So we will then go into what I suspect will be a sort of new dark age. To an extent, when the Romans left Britain in 400 AD, a whole new game came forward, and there was turmoil for 600 years until the Normans came. And so we could be going into a whole new experience where there will have to be some sort of response. There'll have to be a new medium of exchange. And if you look at your history, we know that paper money, which we think may have started in China, but nobody's fully sure about that, but paper money started, it was a promissory note. And even I remember as a boy, the pound note, if you read the pound sterling, would say, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum in gold. It was a promissory note. And it saved you lugging gold up and down the countryside. Now, here's the problem. Then, of course, what happened was they produced pieces of paper, but the gold wasn't really there, wasn't in the vaults. So the question is, will they go back to a gold standard? You know, that's the next obvious question. Is plan B to go onto a gold standard? We know central banks acquiring gold. Now, they have been acquiring gold for some time. The Chinese on a very big scale and the Russians on a very big scale. The Americans are supposed to have, I can't remember how many ounces off the top of my head.
8,000 tons normally.
That's the figure that I have on my pad. But now the question is, do they have it?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
No.
It hasn't been audited since the 1950s. There's no audit. They won't let an audit. Why will they not let you have an audit, one wonders? Because it's not there. It's not there, is it? It's not, it isn't
so.
there.
I think so.
Which is why it took so long for the Germans to get their gold back. It took ages. They could have put the gold reserves of Germany in America would have gone on one jumbo jet. It would have gone on a Boeing 747. It could have been flown the next day. It took 3 years. So what's leased? What have they got rid of? What's going on? Now, of course, if they go back to the gold standard, which they left in 1970, which was 71 was fake anyway, when Nixon closed the gold window, and we've seen the 1970 United States dollar, its purchasing power now is 6 cents. I mean, it's totally and utterly collapsed, but it happens so slowly, people don't really the boiled frog, you know, the boiled frog.
Yes,
if you put a frog in the cold water and you boil it slowly enough, he doesn't know he's boiling to death. That's what the people, because people don't understand money. Not taught money at school, are they? Nobody taught how banks work or money works at school. That's quite deliberate. That's quite deliberate. Politicians and bankers don't want you to know. And Henry Ford said, a great quote, which you'll probably be familiar with, in 1926, if people knew how banking worked, they'd never put their money in a bank again. So if they go back to a gold standard, they will have to recalibrate the gold. They can't do it at today's prices, at, $1,800 an ounce. No, it would have to be recalibrated at a much higher level. It would have to be recalibrated to probably $7,000 or $8,000 an ounce, maybe even more, if they wanted to bring it back to where it should be, or where it was when there was a gold standard. And of course, we also know that Roosevelt, in the 1930s, confiscated Americans' gold. He confiscated their gold. You weren't allowed to hold it. Now, here's an interesting thing. I wonder whether their plan B, the government doesn't have any money. Governments don't have any money. Plan B has to be rob the citizen somehow, doesn't it? There's nowhere else to get the money. You have to rob the citizen. And they're already using phraseology. Build back better. Reset. The new normal. When politicians start talking in those terms, it means they're going to rob you at some stage somehow. And that is the problem. So you have to have whatever your holding is. Let's say the citizen wants to hold gold or silver. Let's just say gold or silver to keep things simple. You have to have it in specie. You must have it. You must not let it be with a bank and accept a bank promissory note. Because all they will do is they'll just tell you that they've got their gold and they haven't got the gold, but they'll give you the money for it. You don't want that. You must have the gold in specie. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. But you don't want to hold it at home, of course, but you've got to have a private security deposit box somewhere, which is safe and secure, but something the government can't get at. The government can't get at that. They can get at anything in the bank because they own the banks. So they can take it, but they can't take it, A, if they don't know where it is, and you've got it somewhere safe and secure, but not in a bank that the government has access to. So that's really the secret. Okay, we can go for our next. Since the crisis of 2008, central banks and governments have been pumping fresh money into the world to support the system in the form of quantitative easing. And since COVID, there are no breaks at all. What do you think are the consequences of this for the people, society, and the world? I mean, we talk about inflation, hyperinflation, name it. What is your view on it in the next years? Well, one of the problems we have trying to read the runes on this is it's unprecedented. This hasn't happened in modern history. So we just don't know. But we can analyze what the problems are. In the Western industrial democracies, we have welfarism. Now, I worked in Hong Kong for a while. The concept in China for paying somebody not to work is beyond their understanding. With welfarism, you can have a young man or young woman who won't work because if you're picking potatoes or strawberries or whatever it is in cold weather and it's not very nice, you can stay at home and the government will pay you. And you can't blame young people for that. You can't blame anybody for that. If somebody said to me when I was 21, we'll pay you almost the same as you could earn to stay at home, I'd have stayed at home. Because I'm an ordinary guy. I'd have actually played rugby and I would have gone sailing, as a matter of fact. I wouldn't have just stared at the wall. But I would have thought it was fantastic to pay me to do what I wanted in the day and not turn up for work. All the Western democracies do that. There's no sense of self-responsibility with people. It's drilled in. We now have a third or fourth generation who believe that they are owed a standard of living without working for it. And this is the problem. Those welfare commitments means that we can't get out of debt. All these commitments and indexing pensions. pension schemes for the civil service are index linked. So inflation doesn't affect politicians or civil servants. The creators of inflation are index linked. Mm-hmm. So they will get their increases every year. But if you're the butcher, the baker, the cab driver, the hairdresser, inflation bites into you, but not the public servants. They are immune. But they think they're immune forever. But they're not. That can't escape. Nobody's going to escape this. There's not going to be one section of society who escapes this. So that's the problem. We also have militarism in North America, which is as militaristic as Prussia was in the 1890s. They spend $1 trillion a year on military. They have 200,000 overseas personnel, military personnel. They have 800 overseas bases. They have 11 aircraft carrier groups. They're mad. I've been to Washington on any number of occasions. The neocons who run Washington and therefore run North America are completely insane. Why do they need all this hardware? And a friend of mine, because I got a lot of military friends, because I'm an ex-soldier myself years ago, when we had bows and arrows. So I still have a lot of friends who are in the American military. And one, I said, why do you need all this? And he said, oh, Godfrey, he said, there's a lot of bad people out there. And I said, you are they. You're the bad people now. They're no longer the white hat protecting the freedom. They're now crashing all around the world, bombing everything inside. They're the problem. Mm-hmm. So there's they don't even know where it goes. It's not audited. They don't even know where the $1 trillion a year goes. So that's going to be interesting. Mm-hmm. There is a historical precedent that when countries get into a bad state, they start a war somewhere, which they hope will bring the country together, mm-hmm. consolidate, because people have a natural patriotism. Yeah. And it's a natural thing to be loyal to the tribe. There's nothing wrong with that. It's quite loyal, but it's easily misused. It's easily misused. So will we see, and it's already, there are things already upsetting me, and I speak as a strategist. I'm also a graduate of the Royal College of Defence, so I trained in strategy, geopolitical and military strategy. I would like to know why the Americans are in force in the South China Sea. I'd like to know why the Royal Navy is in the Black Sea. And that's the Russians' backyard. Mm-hmm. What are we doing there? We've got no business to be there. The Russian Navy isn't in the Solent. The Russian Navy isn't sort of in the Irish Sea. Why are we in the Black Sea? And of course, that can trigger an incident. Mm-hmm. And if the CIA want the incident triggered, nobody will quite know who fired the first shot. No. And the next thing, you've got a war. And we saw this happen in 1914. We saw this happen in 1914, which is close to an accidental war as you could possibly get, and left millions dead. I mean, it was the most dreadful war, the Great War, and it was totally unnecessary. Mm-hmm. Now, if you go back to the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, that was deliberately created by Bismarck. He deliberately created a war with France for no reason, so he could consolidate a federal Germany. And it was very successful. Mm-hmm. He was a bad man. But so I think warfare is going to be high up on the agenda somewhere, misusing people's sense of patriotism and blaming everybody else, blaming the Chinese for this, that, and the other, blaming the Russians. The Russians have only got one aircraft carrier. You know, what? So you've only got to look at the Iranian military budget is 0.5% of the Americans. Mm-hmm. But they're the big bogeyman, aren't they? They're the big bogey. The military industrial complex has to have a bogeyman. Mm-hmm. They have to have an enemy. And Eisenhower warned us of this in his departure speech as President of the United States 1960, I think it was. He said, beware of the military-industrial complex. Beware of that, because with all this $1 trillion, you've got to have a war somewhere. Otherwise, the American taxpayer will want to know why they're paying for all this. And incidentally, something that your viewers may not know, and that is not a single soldier died in combat under the presidency of President Eisenhower, because he was a real soldier. He was an experienced soldier, and he knew what war is and what war means. And he was very, very keen to make sure he didn't get America into an unnecessary one. And that thinking's now gone in Washington. You know, let's have a war. Trump, for all his faults, didn't start any new wars, and for that he should get some credit. You know, this guy now, Biden, I mean, he should be in a home. He should be in a home somewhere. You know, he's clearly unwell, isn't he? And he's the great superpower. He's at the helm of a great superpower. So the CIA will call the shots. The Pentagon will call the shots. He'll sign anything. He'll sign because he's away with the fairies. So that is very, very dangerous. Of course, China has been acquiring gold in very big numbers, as has Russia. It's possible, unlikely though it seems at the moment, that the new reserve currency will be a gold-backed Chinese currency of some. That's not off the table. And if you look at the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement, which has got all those Far East, and I'm sure you've been, and I'm sure loads of viewers on this will have been to the Far East, Hong Kong, Bangkok, all these places are growing. They don't have welfare. They don't have any welfare commitments. You don't get out of bed in the morning and work. You don't eat, which is the only way you can run a society successfully. You can't interfere with the market. And the future is the Far East. It isn't here. It certainly isn't Europe. No. They could turn America around with the right leader, of which who knows who that could be. Europe is moribund. You know, it's welfare, it's regulated. I mean, one of the reasons that the British voted for Brexit was because there was a rule and regulation for everything. You couldn't wake up in the morning. You couldn't phone the gas man. A man come to do your roof couldn't put a ladder up. You know, you couldn't get your lawnmower, you know, with an on and off button. Nothing worked because it was full of committees in Brussels and Strasbourg interfering with everybody with no experience. This might interest your viewers. I did my research team to look at all 700 members of the European Parliament in 2014. Do you know how many we found who had done a real job that you and I and your viewers would understand as a real job? You know, actually in the wealth case, but it didn't matter whether they were barman, a dustbin man, a cab driver, a real job as you and I would understand it. 11 out of 700.
Unbelievable.
And they're making rules and regulations all the time about everything. 2,000 rules and regulations a year.
2,000 new?
Yes.
New.
Yeah. 2,000 new regulations every year. The voting, if you look in the chamber, the voting's quick. You've got to be really quick or press the button. It's flying through. And what was very interesting was when they do all this, the British, under a different legal system, which is common law and statute law, we had the same amount of legislation passed from the Bill of Rights, which is 1688, to 2014. The number of laws passed in that period were the same as the entirety of legislation coming from the European Union in the last 10 or 11 years. So we were being swamped with legislation. Now the British like to have a few rules and regulations, and they obey them. Under Corpus Juris, or the Napoleonic Code, in mainland Europe, the European Union, there are thousands of regulations, which of course a lot of people ignore. I mean, you've got to wear a crash helmet in, on your scooter. Well, if you've been to Naples, who takes any notice? If you go to the market, the great market in Santander, you've got a guy with a cigarette in his mouth, cutting off a bit of garlic bread to see if you want to taste it. Nobody's dead, incidentally. It works perfectly well. If you did something like that in Britain, it would close everything down. Have we got enough fire extinguishers? We've got a village hall. I've got a small holding in a Yorkshire village. We've been having an annual event there for Harvest Festival for hundreds of years in the church hall. Mm-hmm. Suddenly we were limited to 80 people because the EU regulations stated that we didn't have enough fire entries and exits and all the rest of it. And of course, being British, we obeyed it. Yeah. Now, a Frenchman would have taken no notice. Yeah. And the man enforcing the regulation would have been a Frenchman's cousin. But in Britain, we've got a little man with a hat, a millboard, very important man. But, this is why we got out. We just got fed up with it. We just got fed up with it.
Okay. I go to my next question. Central banks manipulate interest rates, pumping money into the system otherwise, which everyone has increasingly more debt that cannot be paid at a given time. Then the commercial banks fall or fail again, and the governments save these banks with population money, etc. And the incredible thing is that this is so designed into the system. I have three little questions about this. One, do you think that the people in both the central banking system and in government who are aware of this scam, should be punished? Two, should the whole population be aware of the design of the monetary system? And three, how do you see the previous 2 points reusable? Do you understand what I say?
Yes. The problem that we have goes back quite a long way in Britain. Mm-hmm. It goes back to the Bank Charter Act of, I think it was 1840 or very close to 1840. And this was an interesting phenomenon where if you put your money in a bank, you deposited £10,000 in the bank. Mm-hmm. It became then legally the property of the bank. It wasn't yours for the bank to look after. It became the property of the bank to do with whatever they wanted. That was the first major problem in banking. Mm-hmm. Now, if you did that with any other commodity, if you were a farmer and sent your corn to a corn exchange, if they sold it without your knowledge, that would be illegal and they go to prison. But bankers didn't. Bankers are unique in this. Bankers are unique that they can do absolutely anything they like, and that goes back to 1840. Now, what we need to do is that we have to go back to a system. So the bankers aren't doing anything illegal. It should be illegal. Mm-hmm. It should be illegal. I would make it illegal. Now, what is very interesting is the Las Vegas gaming board. You go to Las Vegas, you go to a big casino, and they will give you your plastic chips. Mm-hmm. It is illegal in Las Vegas, in Nevada, for them to issue a plastic chip unless it's backed by dollars in the vault downstairs. So what we should have is a system, just like the Las Vegas gambling board. If the bank gives you a note, it should be backed up with an asset of some description, mm-hmm. probably gold, but it doesn't have to be gold. That note, they've got to have that asset before they can give you that note. And they would then charge you a money for an amount for safekeeping. They would keep, safekeeping. And then that would work. We'd get back to a system of proper banking. Now, what they should do if they want to use your money, what they should do is say, if you give, there's two accounts, 10 you'll give me your £10,000 and we'll keep it safe for you in our vault, and we will charge you £100 a year in order to keep it safe. Mm-hmm. And the other should be, there's another alternative. If you let us have it for 5 years, we can then make use of it by lending it out, and we will give you interest on that. That is your price for letting us use your money, mm-hmm. Which is how it used to be. So 5%. Yeah. Let's say it's 5%. Here's your 10,000. You get 5%. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people, of course, at the moment, I'm one of them, years ago, built up their savings. So when they come to retirement, they can live off the interest. So I've got built up quite a lot of money. My 5% then would give me, I can live on my 5%. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I can dip into the capital very occasionally for if the roof blows off or something like that. Anyway, so that's it. But I can't do that. Nobody can do that now. Who's suffering badly at the moment? Pensioners, people on fixed incomes, people with no political power. Mm-hmm. This is all about crushing little people. Mm-hmm. The big guys are fine. They've got assets, they've got everything, they're doing. It's always the same, and it's probably been the same since the beginning of time. The little guy is always getting crushed. Mm-hmm. And the only way the little guy can protect himself is to take himself out of their game. And bear in mind, every time, there's a saying that I picked up the other day, every time you buy a piece of gold, a central banker dies a little bit inside.
That's right.
Which it's got to be good. So they're not doing anything illegal. I would make it illegal. Then you could start sending bankers to prison, which would give me great delight. Volcker, of course, did this in the 1980s. He raised interest rates. The inflation was out of control in America, and he raised interest rates to 17 or 18%, which actually then put the brakes on. Free money. You couldn't get rid of this free money. You go around England at the moment, you'll find that new housing going up everywhere. Ordinary little English market towns with new houses as far as the eye can see. Mm-hmm. And this is happening because money's free. Money's free. And we're all seeing the inflation of house prices, and we're seeing the inflation of the making. Wood, timber's gone up 200%, I think, in the last 6 months. There's all sorts of shenanigans happening on this. So it could be gripped. I'm not altogether sure that it's not too late. I think it's gone too far to save. It's too far to rescue. If you go back to historically the administration of President Warren Harding in 1920, and nobody talks about Warren Harding and his administration. Everyone talks about Roosevelt, who was economically illiterate. I mean, he was hopeless. I mean, he really was hopeless. Mm-hmm. Great friend to Britain in the war, not after the war, but in the war. Anyway, leaving all that aside, that is one of the things that we need to be looking at. Warren Hastings' administration, actually, he spoke to the nation, and he said, America is living beyond its means. And he cut government spending by 1/3. It was extraordinary. And it was the recession that never happened. Mm-hmm. It was the recession that never happened. And that was in 1920. The recession came later in 1929, 1930, as we all know. Yeah. And the reasons for that are best summed up by Murray Rothbard, whose book you can still get via the Mises Institute, what happened in the universities. University economics lecturers still do not understand why the American Depression started and why it lasted so long. It's misunderstood. Mm-hmm. Everything is Keynesianism. He didn't print enough money, should have printed more dollars, he should have done something. He didn't let the market sort itself out. He didn't let the market will always find its level. Mm-hmm. The market will always sort itself out. But the market is not allowed to operate in the Western democracies. And people talk about a crisis of capitalism. We don't have capitalism. We have mercantilism. And they are two very different things. Capitalism is a completely and free market. There's only been one place since the war on the face of the planet who had real capitalism, and that was Hong Kong, when it was a British territory colony, and it was run by the guy who ran Hong Kong. His view was his only job as the governor of Hong Kong was to make sure that the police were there and the drains worked, and that was it. Everybody else, and we watched their income per capita in Hong Kong go way ahead of the Western democracies because they were allowed to get on with it. In the same way, after the war, Erhard was the financial chancellor of Germany after the war, and he basically let the Germans get on with it, rebuilding their nation without too much interference, which has never been given enough credit for, which is why Germany overtook Britain economically, because we adopted socialism. We had socialism in 1940. We kicked out Churchill and had socialism. And of course, we were still having ration books. I remember ration books. We had bread rationing, which we didn't have in the war when the socialists got in. Socialism is death. It's hopeless. It doesn't work. But people, what we've got now is basically socialism. I mean, the European Union is pretty socialist. It borders on, well, it's very close to fascism, and I don't use that as a pejorative term. I'm saying, the system of government, which is basically the suppression of the individual freedom for that of the state, and an alliance between big business and banks. That was fascism. That's how it works. Yeah. They control production. They control the economy, whereas communism own the economy. Neither system is effective. Neither system works. Real capitalism is we don't have. And when things are breaking down because we have mercantilism, people are blaming on capitalism, which we don't have. This is being perpetuated at schools and universities. Because if you're lecturing at school or teaching at school or lecturing at a university, you're one of life's losers. You're one of life's losers. That's where losers go. Losers go into the state school teaching system. Right? One or two vocational people. There are a few vocational teachers, but they are pitifully few. Most people go there because it's a soft option. It's not the hurly-burly of roughy-toughy real life. You can hide. You can hide in the state system. No. And that's the reason to go into it. So consequently, you get another generation of very poorly educated children now, and I lecture at the universities. I used to lecture when I was allowed in all the time. Very nice kids, very nice young people, but they're not at university for an education. In Western Europe, they are in Poland. You go to lecture at the Warsaw School of Economics. Their undergraduates are really clever. They can speak about 3 different languages. They can tell you about Napoleon's campaigns in the peninsula. These guys are really switched on. They're miles ahead of British undergraduates, and I suspect most Western European undergraduates. Most undergraduates in Western Europe go there for a good time, parties, drink, sport. Good on them, fine. I mean, that's great. I wish I'd had some of that, but that's okay. But they don't go there for an education.
Okay. One other thing, I think, do you think that the physical gold will play again a temporary or final role in the new financial system? What will come in?
It must, as I see it, it must somehow, because I can't see an alternative. I can't see an alternative to going back. Don't forget, it's not experimental. We turn to gold. All we're doing is looking at 5,000 years of history. So if we turn to gold, we're just going back to where we should have been. I would argue the establishment of the Fed in 1913, for example, is when things started to go wrong. When central banks and the Fed and so on and so on, when all that came in, things started to go wrong. And the reason people degrade currencies, states, is to go to war. That degrades currency. And when the gold standard failed in the 1920s in Britain, it's because we tried to go back to the pre-war calibration. We should have recalibrated gold. Well, we didn't do that. People say, oh, gold standard doesn't work. It's because they don't understand what we did wrong with the last time. But people, people just don't, politicians just don't know anything about anything. They're completely stupid. The academic world isn't much better. The civil service isn't much better. It's, the trouble is the people with the levers of power shouldn't have the levers of power. And the people who should have the levers of power don't want them because they're too busy doing other things. But who goes into politics? Only weird people go into. They're weird, aren't they? They're weird. You can tell. You go to have a drink with one. They go, "Hey, he's weird, and he's weird." They're all weird, and so that is a problem. It's the same the world over. People go into politics. There's one American friend of mine who writes for the Cato Institute. He says, "You can only succeed in politics if you are a sociopath. It's a bonus for a politician. You've got to behave in a way that no normal person would behave. You've got to stab your colleagues in the back. You've got to be prepared to lie to camera. You've got to be able to do everything. Is that you have to be a sociopath." And our government's full of them. Boris Johnson's a complete sociopath. This man, Mac Hancock, has been, I don't know whether you know out there, but our Secretary of State's just been caught with shenanigans and he's had to go. But they're not getting rid of, he's not going because he was a scallywag. He's not going because he's a wrong 'un and a bad man, which he is. He's going because he got caught.
Yeah.
That's why he's going. Don't get caught. So this is one of the problems. But gold certainly, and I think again it will come from the Far East again. The Chinese, the Russians, and so on. For that Shanghai cooperation sphere. I know Russia's not the Far East, but and of course the Indian subcontinent, which is another probably a sleeping giant.
Yeah,
we've yet to see.
That's right.
But gold, they regard gold as money. You're Indian, that is money. Gold is money.
Yeah.
When an Indian gets married, the family rally round and give him gold. It might be in the form of jewelry, but it's gold. So gold is money, whether we like it or not. Gold is money. And the other thing I tell my undergraduates, when you've got that gold coin, the gold sovereign, and I say it will buy you bed breakfast in a London hotel, it will also buy you bed and breakfast in New York or Rio de Janeiro or Cape Town or Delhi. You go in with that, and they will accept that as payment. They might have to go outside and change it somewhere and all the rest of it, but they will accept it. Your Indian businessman will bite your hand off because there's a tax on being gold in. Yeah, it has to, in some form it has to, even if it's just amongst ourselves. So for example, let's say you were selling your house, people might say, I can pay you in gold coin. The equivalent, you want 50,000 or whatever it is, a gold coin. Will you take it? And I think people go, yeah, I'd take it. If I wanted to sell my car, people give me the right amount, right amount of gold coin, I'd accept it straight away. You wouldn't. So yeah, silver's interesting. The ratio between gold and silver, which has always been, it's been stretched and stretched. Silver's difficult as an industrial metal as well, but we're still seeing the same problems that we had with gold, which is fraud. Pieces of paper saying that we're holding silver and they're not, in the same way that people are buying ETFs, gold, which of course is Basel III. Shall I talk about Basel III for a moment? Would that be worthwhile?
Yeah, Basel III, 28 June, it started. We don't see anything at the price at this moment because it now, as I understand it, it now only starts for the European banks. And then the 1st of January of next year, it's going to start for the US banks and I think United Kingdom, yes, LBMA, United Kingdom. It's only the 1st of January next year. Basel III.
Well, the problem that we've had for years, and the London bullion dealers are screaming, is that, and they brought it on themselves. In my book, I explain it a little bit, but basically what we have here, and nobody quite knows, but there are around about 600 pieces of paper to every piece of gold. So you go to your bank or your financial advisor and say, I want to buy gold. He will buy you an exchange traded fund. And that isn't gold, that's a promissory note. It's a promise from a bank. I mean, really, who wants a promise from a bank? So what actually happens here, the Basel III have said, quite reasonably, you can't hold as a main asset a piece of paper promised from another bank. You can't do that. If you're going to have gold, you have to have the gold in specie, or maybe an allocated account, and that is an area of grey because it comes back to auditing. Is it really there? Yes, it's an allocated account. I hold silver in an allocated account ETF because otherwise I'll be paying. That's a tax position. It's the reason I do that.
Yeah.
Tax position. Yeah. They say that we have the gold for you, Mr. Bloom. It's audited and it's held at the Hong Kong, Shanghai. Do I believe them? I don't really think I do, no. But there we are. We don't know. So silver and gold have this problem of it being traded, and that suits the authorities. It suits Wall Street. It suits the central banks. They don't want us to buy gold because it cuts them out of the loop. And they're now getting panicky about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. They're now ganging up in the world to see how they can snuff out Bitcoin. They hate the idea of not controlling the money. And they come up with all sorts of excuses. Oh, well, yeah, it's only drug dealers use it and all this kind of thing. No. The real gangsters in the world, the real gangsters, the monster gangsters are the central bankers. Not your drug dealer, they're the central bankers. You are more likely to be robbed by a politician than any burglar. And I was speaking in Hamburg last year, and I asked everybody in the audience, I said, who's been robbed and burgled or mugged? And hardly any hands went up. And I said, well, who's had to pay tax under the threat of violence, which is what tax is. If you don't pay your tax, they lock you up, which is pretty violent. Everybody put their hand up. It's the state who will steal your money. And they say, oh, yes, but look at what we give for it. Look what you get. Well, you don't really get very much. They pretend you do. You get an education system which is hopeless. You get roads full of potholes. You get a health service which isn't fit for purpose and hasn't been now for many years. Forget coronavirus. So they give you all these things. This is the trouble with welfarism. They say, give us all your money and we'll take care of you from cradle to grave. We'll take care of your pensions. We'll take care of your unemployment pay. We'll take care of your health. We'll take care of your education. We'll take care of everything, but in exchange for that, give us all your money. And in Britain today, it's the highest tax take in Britain for 50 years. We are paying more tax now in Britain than we have paid in 50 years. And I'm including VAT, income tax, duty on all this kind of thing. I'm including it all. It's absolutely horrific. So the person most likely to steal money from you is the politician. The difference between the modern politician and the medieval king, the medieval king was honest. He stole your money for him. He said, I want your money, it's mine. I want that. Your modern politician doesn't do that. I'm stealing your money for your own benefit.
For your own good.
And the trouble is, you look out of your window or you go across the market square, 90% of the people fall for it. Most people are stupid. That's why we get stupid politicians.
Mm-hmm.
But really smart people can stay ahead of the game by doing a bit of homework, by being a bit clever. Don't be caught out. But most people don't pay attention. Most people hope it'll all be all right on the night, and maybe things will get better.
Mm-hmm.
But they won't. You have to take charge for you and your family. You have to make the decisions yourself. You have to take these decisions and take these steps yourself. Mm. And people now, we have a whole generation who don't like doing that. They're used to the government doing everything for them. Oh, it's always somebody else's fault. The government are going to look after me. You know, if you've got to man up, you've got to man up.
Yeah. We try to make a little bit of difference in it. I have one more question for you. Now, with the situation that we have now, which is very difficult, of course, but can you, what do you think in prices? How do silver and gold evolving over the next 5 to 10 years in prices? I know it's very difficult, but...
Well, I always avoid trying to put a fiat currency price on it.
Yeah, I know.
Because you can't.
No, you can't.
Because if what I suspect is going to happen, what must happen,
yeah.
You know, gold will go to infinity.
Mm-hmm.
And I know some very top academics from Eastern Europe who believe that gold will go to infinity because nobody will sell it. They won't sell it for paper money. So it could go to infinity. But I still reckon that if you have, I hold quite a lot of silver. But that's slightly more difficult to read. Silver's a bit more difficult to read. But certainly gold will buy your gold coin will buy you in 10 years time, you say 5 or 10 years time, it will buy you in 5 or 10 years time what it will buy you today. And that's how it's always been. So whether it's a house or a car, doesn't matter what it is that you want to spend that money on. Let's say that your new car is £30,000, 30,000 euros. If you have that in today's money in gold, but you're not buying a new car for 5 years. If you put that in the bottom drawer, that will buy you a new car in 5 years. You put 30,000 euros in your bottom drawer, it won't. It won't even probably fill the tank with petrol.
I think so.
So it's far more dangerous not to own gold than it is to own it. It's dangerous not to have it. Very dangerous financially. And people say, oh, stocks and shares, if you look over the years, the stock market is at another bubble level, and it's being pumped up with fake money. And the stock market will crash, real estate will crash, everything will crash. It has to. There's no way it cannot crash. It has to. But as I say, because quite when, who knows when? This year, next year, it might be 2 or 3 years away. I don't know. It's getting closer all the time. It's getting closer all the time, especially the last year. I mean, America, the world's reserve currency, you can't print dollars at that rate without massive degradation, which we're already seeing. It's the same with pound sterling, and it'll be the same with the euro because the euro will eventually crack as well as people wise up. And the Germans and the Low Countries aren't going to put up with bailing out the Mediterranean countries forever.
No.
They're sooner or later they're going to, and it will happen. It's happened in, and I foretold that the breakup of the European Union will be when the European Central Bank collapses. It will bring the whole thing down together. And then I think Belgium and Holland and Germany and the Baltic countries will say, just a minute, let's start again. You know, and not make it so big and so overwhelming.
Yeah.
It wasn't the original idea of the European Union to micromanage people's lives and businesses and relationships. That wasn't the original idea. The original idea was to have a confederation, if you will. People joined it as on the basis it was a sort of confederation. I know there are the European superstate fanatics, and they've been there since the beginning, who want a superstate with one parliament, one president, and one everything, which of course is absurd. You've only got to travel about. I mean, I've been all over Europe, I've been all over the world. And a southern Italian doesn't even think like a northern Italian.
No.
He's certainly not going to think like a German. And the Swedes don't even like the Norwegians. I know the Norwegians aren't in the European Union, but everybody's got their own thing. I live in Yorkshire. We don't like Lancashire people, which is the county next door. It's historic. It goes back 1,000 years. Yeah. And we all hate Londoners because we think they're stupid. And of course, if you you'll get the same thing in Bavaria. If you go to Bavaria, they think Berliners are stupid and vice versa. So we don't even like each other.
Okay. Oh, those were the questions I had for you. Do you have any things you would like to say that people should know right now at this moment?
Well, I have a website, which has new articles and new videos all the time. It's very active, and it's got a new page which is getting a lot of traction on the whole coronavirus, what you won't get on mainstream media, what you're not being told, written by independent virologists, immunologists and doctors from all over the world, independent, at the top of their field, who will not be allowed on mainstream TV. They're not allowed on.
Oh.
It's really worth having a look at that. I think people will find that fascinating.
We put that in the description of the video. I have the names from Patrick, and we put it on the description.
That's super. Thank you. Yeah, and they'll find everything. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, I will respond. I always respond.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Bloom, thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. And like I said, we provide the website and the description, and then I hope we see and we speak at each other later. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Goodbye.
Oké, bye bye. Volg ons YouTube-kanaal voor aankomende interviews met meer experten van over heel de wereld. Er wordt ook lid van onze besloten Facebookgroep Silver Squeeze, goud en zilver, waarom, wanneer, hoe en waar. Zo blijft u op de hoogte van alle nieuwe updates over de markt. Wilt u meer info of advies over het aankopen van fysiek goud of zilver? Ga dan naar onze website www.europeesegoudstandaard.be. Bedankt voor het kijken en tot een volgende video.